My son threw me out of his own living room like I was some troublemaker crashing a party. I'm 60, not old enough to be fragile, not young enough to pretend it didn't sting, and yet standing there in front of all those people, I felt smaller than I had in decades. One minute I was trying to get comfortable on his stiff, overpriced sofa, and the next Warren was pointing at the door, face flushed, voice echoing off the walls. "Dad, that's it. Get your coat and go." His wife Darla let out a sharp laugh, the kind meant to cut, and a few relatives shifted awkwardly, pretending to check their phones or sip their drinks while they watched everything unfold. It's funny how humiliation still feels the same at 60 as it did at 16. Hot, sharp, and humiliating in places you didn't know could hurt. Part of me wanted to argue, to remind him who kept a roof over his head through half his childhood mistakes, but another part whispered, "Clifford, don't start a war in front of all these people." My legs felt unsteady, not because of age, but because betrayal has a way of hollowing you out from the inside. Before I go further, let me say something from the heart, because sometimes talking helps me steady myself. Subscribe, hit the like button, and tell me in the comments how old you are and where you're from. For you it's just a small thing, but for me it's the reason I keep telling these stories. When your own family stops listening, it matters that someone still does. I grabbed my old brown coat from the hook. The one Eileen, my wife, keeps teasing me about. Because it smells like garage dust and winter air. My fingers shook a bit as I buttoned it, and behind me Darla muttered, "This should have happened years ago." Loud enough to be cruel, but soft enough to sound accidental. The living room buzzed with awkward silence, the kind that tells you everyone wants to look away but can't. And then, something shifted. Eileen, quiet Eileen, finally stood. She moved slowly but with purpose, her chair scraping just enough to silence every conversation. Warren froze mid-breath, Darla's smirk collapsed, and even the TV's glow suddenly felt dimmer. Eileen looked around the room, then at Warren, and said 5 calm, unshakable words that cut through the air like glass. "This house is not his." In that moment, this house, the whole room seemed to stop breathing, and even I didn't yet know just how deep those 5 words would reach. When Eileen said those 5 words, Warren blinked at her like she'd suddenly started speaking another language. Darla's mouth hung open just long enough for me to wonder if a fly might wonder, in which, honestly, would have been the most useful thing she contributed all evening. Several people shifted their weight, pretending they hadn't just heard the verbal equivalent of a lightning strike, and I stood there halfway into my coat, feeling like I was watching a movie where I didn't know the ending, even though I was in it. Warren finally managed to choke out, "What are you talking about?" His voice cracked, and not the angry crack from earlier, the panicked kind he used to have as a kid whenever he realized he'd forgotten his homework, usually right after we'd already driven halfway to school. Part of me wanted to laugh just remembering it. Another part wanted to sit down before my knees did something dramatic on their own. Eileen didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She just walked past me calm as a Sunday morning and put her hand on the armchair like she was steadying herself. But I knew that stance it meant she was about to dig her heels in. "Clifford, and I didn't tell you everything when we moved here," she said. "We didn't want you to worry." A murmur swept the room. Someone gasped softly. Someone else dropped a cracker. And in the corner, my cousin Lowell leaned forward so hard his cheap folding chair squeaked loud enough to remind everyone why we never ask him to bring furniture to gatherings. Warren tried to puff himself back up. "This is my house. I pay the bills." Eileen held up a single finger, and he actually stopped mid-sentence. I hadn't seen him obey that fast since he was 9, and she caught him trying to microwave a metal fork. "The mortgage," she said evenly, "is not in your name." A silence fell so heavy, it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. I swear, even the refrigerator stopped humming for a moment, probably out of respect. Darla's face drained of color like she'd just remembered she'd left something important in the oven. Warren stared at us like he was waiting for someone to shout, "Just kidding." And I stood there wondering if I should take my coat off or leave it half on in case things went south. At 60, you learn to always be ready for an exit, but also for a nap, depending on where the evening goes. But the moment that really cracked the tension came from the least expected place. Our grandson, little Chester, who suddenly blurted out, "Wait, does that mean Grandpa owns my Xbox too?" Half the room snorted, the other half tried not to. And Darla shot him a glare so fierce you'd think he'd confess to arson. But the brief laughter only made the silence after it heavier, because what Eileen said was only the tip of the truth, and every single person in that room felt it. Something much bigger, something we had kept hidden for years, was about to surface. Warren's face went from confusion to anger to something close to fear. The kind a man feels when he realizes the ground under him isn't solid after all. He tried to laugh it off, but it came out thin and shaky. Mom, Dad, come on. You're not serious. He looked around the room, desperate for someone to nod along, but everyone stared at him like he'd just admitted he didn't know how to open a jar. Eileen stayed steady, hands resting on the back of a chair, her posture calm in a way that made the tension twice as loud. We bought this house, she said softly. Not you. Not Darla. Us. Her words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. They just hung there, heavy, real, undeniable. Darla stepped forward, her heels clicking like she was marching toward a lawsuit. That can't be true. Warren handles everything. Handles? I muttered before I could stop myself. Last week, he couldn't handle unclogging a drain without calling me in a panic. That earned a few chuckles. Even from old cousin Lowell, who nearly spilled his drink down his shirt, though, to be fair. He usually does that even without laughing. Warren spun toward me. Dad, stop. This is ridiculous. Oh, it gets better, I said, rubbing my forehead, partly from stress and partly because my reading glasses were still sitting crooked after I'd accidentally sat on them earlier. They're fine, just give everything a slight lean, like the world's politely tilting away from me. Eileen took a breath, steady but tired. We never transferred the deed because you two weren't stable enough. We wanted you to have time. To grow. To prove you were ready. A wave of whispers filled the room again. Warren looked like someone had unplugged him. Darla looked like she wanted to start Googling property law right then and there. I stepped closer, not to attack him, but because I suddenly felt something old and painful stirring inside me, disappointment. The kind of father tries to swallow but can't. Why did you think the mortgage never changed names? He opened his mouth, then closed it, because he didn't have an answer. And just when the room couldn't get more tense, my cousin Lowell sneezed so explosively that half the room flinched. I swear the man sneezes like someone starting an old lawnmower. It broke the silence, but only for a heartbeat, because everyone could feel it. This was far from the end of the truth. It was only the first crack. Warren started pacing, one hand in his hair, the other waving in the air like he was trying to swat away the truth. So what, you two just lied to us? For years? His voice wasn't angry now, it was wounded, confused, the kind of tone a man uses when the world stops matching the version he built in his head. Eileen didn't flinch. We didn't lie, we protected you, and we waited for you to grow up. That line hit him harder than anything else so far. His shoulders tightened, his eyes darted toward the guests, as if hoping someone would interrupt and save him from what was coming. No one did. Even Darla's grip on his arm loosened, like she wasn't sure whose side she wanted to stand on anymore. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice calm. Look, son, we didn't plan to drop all this tonight. I came here to have dinner. Maybe ruin my shirt with gravy like I usually do. And right on cue, I looked down and realized I had, in fact, already gotten a tiny gravy stain on my sleeve. Perfect timing. A few people snickered, and honestly, I couldn't blame them. My shirts collect stains the way some people collect stamps. Warren ignored the chuckles and pointed at us again. Why now? Why bring this up now? Because you threw your father out of a house that doesn't belong to you, Eileen answered, not raising her voice even a little. That moment told us you weren't ready to know the truth, but you forced it. The room went still. Even Chester stopped spinning the TV remote in his hands. And for the first time all evening, Warren didn't have a comeback. He just stood there, jaw tight, breathing uneven. I knew that look. It was the same one he had the day he realized bicycles don't stop themselves if you let go of the brakes. Darla finally stepped closer, but her voice was different now, cautious, almost afraid. So, if the house is yours, what does that mean for us? It was the first smart question she'd asked all evening. I took a slow breath. It means this family has been one bad decision away from disaster. and we didn't want to watch you two crash. I turned to see Cousin Lowell attempting to sit down quietly and missing the chair entirely. He landed on the floor with a grunt, muttered, "I'm fine," and waved off anyone who tried to help. Normally that would have drawn laughter, but tonight the tension was too thick. Even Lowell's clumsiness couldn't break it. Because everyone in that room knew the truth still wasn't finished. There was something else, something deeper waiting to come out. Warren finally sat down, sinking into the edge of the sofa like a man whose legs had quietly given up on pretending. He rubbed his temples with both hands, the way he used to when math homework defeated him in 6th grade. Only now there was no worksheet. No pencil. No excuse, just the truth staring him in the face. "So all these years, you two were testing us?" I let out a slow breath. "Not testing, son. Hoping." It came out softer than I expected. Softer than I felt. "Not testing. Not testing. 60 years of life teach you many things, but nothing prepares you for the moment when your child looks at you like you're the villain in his story." Darla folded her arms, clearly annoyed that Warren's collapse didn't match the dramatic speech she'd prepared in her head. "Well, if you wanted us to grow, maybe you should have said something instead of spying from the shadows." I chuckled under my breath, not kindly. "Darla, sweetheart, I'm 60. I don't spy." I squint loudly. A few guests laughed, and I couldn't help feeling a small spark of victory. At my age, you take your triumphs where you can get them. Eileen moved closer to me. Not touching, but standing near enough that I felt steadier. "We kept the house in our name because we wanted you two to build responsibility before we handed over something this big." She paused. "But tonight shows you're not ready." Warren flinched like she'd struck him. "Mom, you think I'm irresponsible?" I sighed. "Son, you tried to fix a leaking sink with duct tape and prayer." Even Eileen pressed her lips together, trying not to laugh. But the humor didn't lighten the heaviness in Warren's eyes. Something inside him cracked, not pride, not anger, but embarrassment. Real, raw embarrassment. And beneath that, something worse. Regret. "I didn't mean to throw you out like that," he said quietly, his voice dropping so low I barely caught it. I just got overwhelmed. Things have been tight." Darla's eyes darted away. The room shifted, small reactions. Tiny movements, the unmistakable scent of a secret floating closer to the surface. "Tight?" Eileen echoed, brows lifting. "Warren, what does that mean?" He didn't answer. Darla didn't either, though her jaw tightened in that way people get when they're rehearsing lies they haven't finished stitching together. I stepped forward, slow and careful, because my lower back had been threatening to mutiny since the moment I put that coat on. "Son," I said, "is there something you haven't told us?" Warren swallowed hard. His fingers dug into the sofa cushion. And right then, right before he spoke, Cousin Lowell's phone went off at full volume with the sound of a rooster crowing. Lowell turned beet red and scrambled to silence it, pressing every button except the right one. The rooster crowed again, louder, twice. Normally I would have laughed until my ribs hurt, but not this time, because Warren finally lifted his head, and the look in his eyes told me the next truth would be the hardest one yet. Warren finally looked up, and for a moment he didn't seem like a grown man with a job and a family. He looked like my kid again, the one who used to hide broken school notes in his backpack until they started falling out on their own. "Dad, Mom, we're behind," he said quietly. "On everything." Warren. But it was too late. The truth was already bleeding out. He pressed his palms together, elbows on his knees. Bills, credit cards, car payments, and some other things. "Other things?" Eileen repeated, her voice calm in a way that made the whole room lean in. I tried to sit down next to him, but my knee made a sound like a bag of chips being stepped on, and I froze halfway through the motion. "If I go down," I muttered loudly, "someone better help me back up, because I'm not sleeping on this floor tonight." A few people chuckled weakly, grateful for the break in tension. I stayed standing, safer for everyone. Warren didn't smile. I tried to fix things, I really did, but everything just kept getting worse. "What did you do?" I asked, already bracing myself. He rubbed his hands over his face. "I took out a loan, a big one, and then another to cover the first one, and then a consolidation loan to cover all of them." My heart sank. Not because I was angry, but because I knew exactly how desperation smells. I'd been 20 once too. Darla jumped in defensively. It's not as dramatic as he makes it sound. Oh, really? I said. How many loans do you consider casual, Darla? 3? 5? Enough to buy a small town? Even Chester peeked from behind the armchair like he was watching a soap opera. Eileen lowered herself into a chair with a sigh not dramatic, more like a woman whose patience had been stretched to the last thread. Warren, we helped you both for years. Why didn't you come to us before it got this bad? Because I didn't want you to think I'm a failure, he whispered. That line hit me harder than anything else that night. I felt something twist painfully in my chest, not anger, but guilt. I took a step closer and put a hand on the back of the sofa for balance. Son, failing is pretending everything's fine while pushing the people who love you away. Before he could respond, Cousin Lowell, who had been sitting very still, trying not to sneeze again, suddenly hiccuped so loudly it sounded like a duck quacking. I'm sorry, he muttered, mortified. Nerves. Someone patted his shoulder, but the moment the laughter died, the heaviness returned. Because Warren wasn't done talking. He'd only peeled back the first layer, and I could feel another one coming, darker, heavier, the kind that changes everything. Warren's next words didn't explode, they just dropped heavy and quiet, like a brick someone let slip from their hands. The last loan isn't in my name. That sent a visible jolt through the room. Even Cousin Lowell sat up straighter, which for him is practically a medical event. Eileen folded her hands slowly. Whose name is it in, Warren? He hesitated. That alone was enough to answer her question. Darla's eyes darted everywhere except toward her husband. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Son, don't tell me. It's in Dad's name, Warren choked out. For a second, I genuinely thought my hearing had gone. I even tapped my left ear, a habit I picked up after years of pretending I could hear waiters in noisy diners. But no, the words were real. They just didn't make sense. In my name? I repeated. How? When? He swallowed. You remember when I asked you for your driver's license a few months ago? I said I needed it for that insurance discount thing? I blinked. Yes, and I said it didn't make any sense, but you insisted, and well, I gave it to you because you're my son, not because I enjoy filling out paperwork. A couple people chuckled, but nobody really smiled. Even Chester peeked up from behind the couch like he'd just overheard the twist in a mystery movie. Darla finally spoke, arms crossed tight. Look, it wasn't supposed to be a big deal. They approved everything so fast. We thought we'd pay it off before you ever found out. Oh, genius, I muttered, because nothing bad ever happens when you make decisions that rely on magical future money. Eileen exhaled. Slowly. Not angry. Not loud. Just deeply disappointed. That sound alone made Warren shrink in his seat. She has a way of sighing that feels like a whole lecture wrapped into one breath. How much? She asked. 3 simple words, and the room leaned forward. Warren's voice was barely a whisper. 83,000. I felt the world tilt. My hand grabbed the back of a chair, and I muttered, if I faint, someone please catch me on my good side. It got a tiny laugh, but my heart wasn't joking. 83,000. In my name. Without my permission. I stared at my son, my boy, and for the first time that evening, the humiliation I felt at the door seemed small compared to this. And yet, one look at his face told me there was still something worse he hadn't said. Something he was terrified to let out. Warren's lips trembled like he was fighting the words, trying to keep them trapped behind his teeth. But guilt has a way of squeezing through any crack. Dad, the loan, it's not the only thing. A shiver ran through me. At 60. I've lived long enough to know that sentence never ends with something pleasant. It's never. And we baked you a cake. Darla pressed her nails into her arms so tightly, I thought she might draw blood. Warren, don't, she hissed, which of course meant he absolutely should. He looked at me, eyes wet, voice cracking. There's a chance they might take action against you. Action, I repeated. Well, what? Like sending me coupons? Because I could use a few. A few people laughed nervously, not because it was particularly funny. but because fear makes anything sound like a joke if it buys you 5 seconds of comfort. Eileen leaned forward, tension stiffening her shoulders. Warren, tell us exactly what you signed. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a man arguing with himself internally and losing every round. They said it would be fine. They said because your credit was perfect, the approval would be instant. I didn't think that, I interrupted, is the first correct sentence you've said tonight. Someone in the back snorted. Another whispered, good Lord, under their breath. Warren covered his face with both hands. Dad, they think you're the primary borrower. If payments stop, they come after you first. My stomach dropped, hard, but I forced myself to stay standing despite my left knee whispering threats. And, he added, barely audible, payment already stopped. That was the moment the room didn't just go silent, it froze. Even Cousin Lowell, who had been chewing a cheese cube loud enough to echo, stopped mid-bite. The cube fell out of his fingers and bounced off his shoe. He didn't pick it up. Suddenly feeling every bit of 60. So let me get this straight. You used my name for a massive loan without telling me, and now they're coming after me for your debt? Warren nodded, shoulders shaking. I'd sit down, I said, but I'm afraid I wouldn't get up again until Tuesday. A weak ripple of laughter moved through the room, but it died quickly, smothered by the weight of what my son had just confessed. For a long moment I just looked at him, really looked at him. Not the grown man he pretended to be, not the angry host who'd tried to kick me out, but the scared child underneath all of it. And beneath the hurt, beneath the betrayal, a different pain hit me. A deeper one. My son hadn't trusted me enough to tell me the truth before everything fell apart. But the worst part? He still wasn't done. The fear in his eyes said there was one more truth heavier than all the rest waiting to surface. Warren's breathing turned shallow, the way a man breathes when holding something poisonous inside his chest. He looked at me, then at the floor, then at Darla, who suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. Dad, the loan wasn't just for bills. Eileen stiffened. Warren, what else? He hesitated so long the tension became a living thing in the room, wrapping around everyone's ribs. Darla jumped in first, her voice too quick, too bright. It's not that serious. People do it all the time. I raised a brow. Darla, usually when people say that, they follow it with something that absolutely nobody does. Warren closed his eyes. It was for an investment. My heart, which had already had a long night, sank another floor. Investment? Please don't say cryptocurrency. A soft laugh rippled through the guests' attired. Shaky one, like everyone was grateful for even a small joke before the next blow landed. Darla exhaled sharply. It wasn't crypto. It was a business opportunity. I folded my arms. What kind of business? Silence. Then Warren whispered, a franchise. Eileen blinked. Of what? He swallowed. It's a smoothie shop. That did it. Cousin Lowell immediately started coughing, not because he was choking on anything, but because he was trying desperately not to laugh. Unfortunately, this made him choke anyway, and he spent 10 seconds wheezing like an accordion someone sat on. A smoothie shop, I repeated slowly. And where exactly is this smoothie empire located? Warren stared at his shoes. It never opened. I stared. Eileen stared. Half the room stared. So, I said carefully, you took out an $83,000 loan in my name for a smoothie shop that doesn't exist? Warren nodded miserably. Darla threw her hands up. It wasn't our fault. The landlord backed out, and the blender equipment got stuck in customs, and the consultant disappeared. The consultant, I repeated. What consultant? She hesitated. The one who said he'd help us launch. The expert. I rubbed my temples. Did you meet this expert? No, Warren admitted. But he had a great website. Somebody in the back let out a genuine groan. It might have been me. Hard to tell. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My mind was juggling too many emotions: anger, disbelief, a strange urge to laugh hysterically, and a wave of exhaustion so strong I nearly sat down on the decorative stool beside me, until I remembered the last time I tried sitting on that thing and it nearly shot across the room like a hockey puck. But underneath all of it was a deeper ache. An older one. Son, I finally said, voice low and tight, why didn't you come to me before you made all these mistakes? His eyes filled instantly. Because I was ashamed. And because I thought you'd say I wasn't ready to handle real responsibility. The words hit me harder than anything so far. Because he was right. But I was ashamed. But hearing him say it still tore something open in me. And then unexpectedly, Eileen stepped closer and placed her hand firmly on my arm. Her touch wasn't soft or comforting. It was steady, resolute. Because she already knew what I was starting to realize. The truth wasn't here to destroy us. It was here to corner our son and force one final revelation he'd been avoiding all night. Warren finally crumbled. Not dramatically, not with shouting, not with excuses, just quietly. His shoulders sagged, his eyes reddened, and he looked at me like a man who'd been running from himself so long he'd forgotten where the finish line was. Dad, I didn't just ruin the finances. I ruined our marriage too. Darla stiffened, shocked for half a second before crossing her arms. Oh, so now it's all your fault? Warren didn't even look at her. You were ready to walk away the moment things got hard. The room held its breath. I stepped closer, slow, careful, my back protesting every inch, and lowered myself onto the sofa beside him. Son, I said quietly, I can fix money. I can fix paperwork. I can even fix whatever the bank thinks I did. I paused. But I can't fix you if you hide from me. He swallowed hard. I didn't want you to see me fail. That dug deep, 60 years behind me, and that was still the wound that hurt most the fear in my children's eyes. That I'd judge them when all I ever wanted was to guide them. Eileen stepped beside us, placing a steady hand on Warren's shoulder. We didn't raise you to be perfect. We raised you to be honest. And tonight, you finally were. The room softened. Even Darla's face changed less sharp, less performative. Maybe she finally saw her husband, not the version she wanted him to be. I sighed long and tired. All right, I said. Here's what's gonna happen. Tomorrow morning, we go to the bank. We straighten everything out. I'll take responsibility for the loan. God help me, but only if you promise something. Warren looked at me with a mixture of fear and hope. Anything. You stop running. You stop pretending. You start rebuilding. His voice cracked. I will. I swear. I nodded. Good, because I'm too old to be chased by debt collectors. They always called during dinner. That earned a real laugh. Even from Darla. Even from Lowell. And in Barbarian, who simultaneously sneezed and hiccuped in what I can only describe as a catastrophic duet. Then Eileen stepped forward, the woman who began all this with 5 quiet words, and faced the room with the calm of a lighthouse. This family fell apart because everyone was afraid to tell the truth. That ends today. I stood, stretching my back with a grunt that made half the room wince in sympathy. And let's be clear, I added, nobody throws me out of a house I paid for, especially not before dessert. That broke the final tension. Laughter rolled through the room, tired, relieved, human. Warren stood too, eyes wet but clearer than they'd been in years. Dad, thank you. I put a hand on his shoulder. You're my son. I'll fight with you, sure, but I'll never abandon you. And as we all began to settle, to breathe again, I realized something strange. This disaster, this awful, humiliating night had finally forced Warren to stop pretending he was alone, and it forced me to stop pretending he didn't still need me. No dramatic speeches, no grand victory, just truth, just family, just a father reclaiming his dignity and a son finally learning what responsibility really looks like. And for the first time that evening, I felt steady, whole, like I hadn't been thrown out at all but finally let back in.